Hello, I'm Professor Philip Treleaven. I'm Professor of Computing at UCL, and we're the top-rated research centre in the UK. And we're a major centre for AI, blockchain, Internet of Things, etc. I tell my students this is probably the most exciting time of their lives due to the change that's going on. Just around me, I've got 15 startups that the students and my colleagues are trying to get going. Having said that, you see in the papers every day major companies that were making maybe maybe even 100 million profit a year or so ago, now going bankrupt. And what I'm going to talk about today is that we're really just at the start of these changes, when we're going to see whole industries possibly disappear or move to other countries, in particular due to the creation of digital marketplaces. So we've seen the effect of Amazon, and most of us can remember the time when Amazon just got started. And Amazon now, I think by memory, is doing something like 60% of the retail in the UK. Unbelievable, really. But this is just the start of the similar sorts of global digital marketplaces for things like insurance, legal, audit, management, consultancy, even investment. And the big problem is that if you take the UK, 80% of GDP is concerned with these sectors, the service sectors. And at the moment, everything is really up for grabs. If you think of Amazon, it's already seen, started off selling books, and now you can buy just about everything on it. And it is becoming a complete ultimate portal or marketplace for retail. Vanguard, that is providing investments. Lots of companies in the UK are offering wealth management and investment services. Vanguard are now offering these services for just for an unbelievably low fee. The latest thing is they've got into pensions. They're becoming a sort of Amazon of financial services. Particularly interested Alipay. In China, everybody who's on the internet basically is spending all their time either on WeChat, which I think is owned by Tencent, or using Alipay. This is not just a financial services company like PayPal, it is actually a complete retailer. It's like an amalgam of Amazon and PayPal. Probably, what are they, maybe 5 years ahead of what we are in the West. The last thing to mention, Ping An, the insurance company. Ping An has set up a digital insurance company, all completely automated, in partnership with Alibaba and also Tencent. And I think I'm correct in saying that last year they did 600 million insurance contracts, presumably general and home insurance. And you might think, well, you know, Chinese insurance, what impact could that have on? It probably cost me, you know, £200 or £300 to insure my car in London, and it sits outside my house. If Alipay, or sorry, if Ping An offers me insurance for £150, I'm obviously going to go with them. But they're just likely to probably, to put it at even more competitively, they might be offering it at £50 or £20. And therefore, you know, the big general and home insurance companies can actually disappear in a short time. So these are things that, you know, it's a sort of watch this space. And because digital is global and it's very easy to move, we can find we've got established industries being attacked by, you know, left field countries and companies. like Singapore, for example. So Singapore, you've got the rule of law, trusted democracy, etc. If Singapore set up a, let's say, a legal services marketplace, we would probably trust them. And if they're providing an Amazon type service and it's easy to use, you know, what impact is this going to have on our big law firms? Interestingly, the Chinese characters for crisis are two parts: danger and opportunity. In fact, it is not quite opportunity, it's more change point. So the key thing for those who has the skills and the ambition, this is an incredible time. I'm in computing, I'm on the right side. But we have to reckon that a large percentage of the population don't have the skills to participate. Countries often don't have the skills to participate. So where are things actually going to go? And that's the big question. We don't know. So what I'd like to introduce here is the sort of digital services infrastructure that I expect to see emerging in the next few years. And the next few years could be 2 or 3, not the next 10 or 12 years. And what we've got is a sort of perfect storm of technologies coming together. At the bottom, if you think of a particular sector like legal services, you've got a blockchain distributed database infrastructure holding all the legal documents and case notes and that. Next, all the data. On top of that, a legal data model so that companies can actually communicate and access information. The next level up, what we call a digital object identifier. Every document, every legal case that's in process, maybe even things like arbitration, all of these things that are in progress, companies, etc., all are uniquely identified and resolvable. It's like combining an internet IP address or a URL with barcodes, telephone numbers, etc. The next is a really interesting technology called federated learning. Everybody is worried about privacy, and federated learning, which has been developed by Google, is a great technology so that you can keep your data private, but you can also collaborate with other organizations without showing them your raw data. So a technology to watch. Now we're getting to the research level. What we're doing already with regulators and some law firms is trying to actually encode regulations and legal contracts in some computer executable way. It's more than just a smart contract. I'll talk about this a little bit later. But once you've got, for example, regulations, laws, etc., encoded in some sort of computer executable way, you can build all sorts of automated services on top of this. So what you can do is, if you've got, for example, health insurance, rather than actually ringing your health insurance provider to get permission to go and see a particular consultant, you have one contract. It's completely automated. And this isn't, we don't have this obviously in the UK at the present, but it's largely what companies like Ping An and the others are already doing in Asia. So a couple of years ago, I used to go around giving talks on the data revolution. We're in a 5-year data journey where companies need to transform themselves to become more like Amazon and Google and set up digital infrastructures. What's happened with COVID? It's gone from a 5-year to a 5-month. It's a perfect storm of technologies coming together, and you either change or there is the danger that you'll be wiped out. Not just companies, you could include universities in this as an example of the way things have changed in the last few months with all online teaching. Just to tell you a little story, I put around a spoof email 2 years ago to UCL called Amazon University. Amazon have set up a university. This clearly is going to have a big impact on us. Interestingly, no one in the university replied. When I sent the same email to my industry contacts and said, you know, I've sent this obviously spoof email, everybody said, yes, it's pretty obvious. And we're starting to see companies like Google, Microsoft, and I expect Amazon, probably Apple as well, will be doing things like online universities in the next probably year or so, maybe even in months, because it's already happening to some degree. And they won't be charging 9,000 a year for a degree. For a degree, they may be even charging $500 for the whole degree, and educating the world. So huge changes, automated digital marketplaces. People are collecting huge amounts of data. We're moving to automated regulation, big push from the government, obviously, because it helps economic competitiveness. And what we're seeing is the sort of tech Amazons now going into other areas like insurance, law, audit, etc., etc. You could say nothing is safe. So if you've got the expertise, if you're not complacent, and this goes for both governments and also for companies, there's huge opportunities to integrate everything and become a major global player. And in many ways, you've got to do this just to compete, as we can see in the retail area. You're getting data-driven supervision technology. I've mentioned previously about computer executable regulations, which will probably be here in the next 2 years, and all this blockchain technology for preserving privacy. A little bit about my own history. About 25 years ago, we developed the first insider dealing detection system for the London Stock Exchange. We basically do applied, what now we call data science, or applied AI. On the back of that, my students developed a lot of the early financial fraud detection technologies and set up a very successful company, which they sold for a lot of money, and they've moved on. In the last 16 years, we built with Deutsche Bank one of the first, possibly the first algorithmic trading platform in Europe. Today, we've done a lot of work in this area, and I'll go through it later. Today, we do a lot of work in automated regulations and automated law tech, but we also do a lot of work on digital infrastructures, because you know, this is the name of the game at the moment. One of the great things that we've got, and I would urge you to go, you know, involve other universities as well. Just in my department, we've got 300 PhD students, 650 master students this year, and also 500 undergraduates. World-class students who can build things, experts in AI, blockchain, Internet of Things. They're a great resource for us, but also a great resource for companies who want to try out new technologies. And when we have an idea for a startup, you know, or some deep tech research that's interesting, we just can then go and try and persuade these students to do this. So it's a wonderful resource, both for us and also the companies that we collaborate with. Then we just go through some of the data science technologies. As I said, what's happened is a lot of technologies have come together in the last year or so, and that collectively you can now do things like that you could never do before. And for example, in the data area, this is sort of an arbitrary classification of the technologies. You've got things like big data. Excuse me. You've got big data. Everybody's collecting huge amounts of data, including things like alternative data. So we've moved on from sort of social media data. Internet of Things. Any device in any building, car, your home, etc., that's got a modicum of electronics will be smart. It will be able to communicate, and you'll be able to interrogate it and connect it to the internet. Chatbots. Normally, these are things that you can either type at or you can speak to in natural language and it gives you a response. Moving on from the sort of Alexas of the world, we're now starting to build personalized chatbots that will do things like give medical advice just to you. So it's trained to know all about you, and it might mentor you, for stress or for, even financial advice, any of these things. Next, we've got the analytics technologies, and in particular, machine learning, and AI. And what I'm predicting will be a big, impactful technology, federated learning. And then down the bottom, we've got the infrastructure technologies that I've already mentioned, digital object identifiers, computer executable rules, contracts, regulations, laws, and blockchain. So big data. I'll talk a little bit about trading systems later on. The big thing about data is that it's really the big data revolution that's driving change and not the AI revolution, which tends to get all the publicity. And what people are doing is obviously collecting more and more data, just about, you could say total data, business, economic, financial, social media, and alternative data. For example, one of my good friends in the United States, who's the head of data science for a big investment fund, buys a pipe of anonymized credit card data from the big companies. And with this, he can see what is going through every retailer's till of those companies. So for example, every retailer in the US, he can see not who is buying it, but what is being bought. And then he uses this for investment. And then there's lots of interesting AI-based analytics for sentiment analysis, behavioral prediction, and such like. Artificial intelligence. Now, normally we think of algorithms and AI as being synonymous. In fact, there are really three areas. The first is computationally intensive statistical methods, such as Monte Carlo, etc. Next, there are things called complex systems. And here, an example of so-called agent-based systems, which I mentioned. And finally, there's artificial intelligence, but in fact, it's not just machine learning. There are three areas. The first is knowledge-based systems, and this is where you code up your knowledge or information in terms of these rules that are readable, and I'll drill down on this. The next is sort of optimization techniques, evolutionary techniques, and then just the final one is machine learning, as I said, which gets all the publicity. So here's an example of a rule-based system. It's quite an interesting technology because it's been around probably for about 25, maybe even 30 years. And you code up your knowledge of your expert as a series of rules, which the computer works through. And it's these sort of systems that work very well in call centers. So you ring up and ask for a loan or a mortgage, and the call center operator is actually, the questions are actually driven by these rules. Next, we have machine learning, and the classic machine learning system are neural networks, which also underlies a lot of the very powerful techniques. And this is, most of the machine learning systems are actually mimicking some form of human intelligence. So obviously neural networks, simplistic models of the way that the neurons might work and understand information. And what you've got is, if you can imagine the little blue dots as like little data transistors that flip over with an activation function, and the links between them, the arcs, of where are the bits that learn, and associated with each of these arcs is a so-called weight, which you can think of as like a little tap. And as you train the system, it adjusts these little taps, the weights, and if the system learns a particular task, then these weights will be adjusted to give you the right answer. So the first time you put what are called a training set through here, when you see this, if you think, for example, of a recognizing a character, you give it a handwritten character and a perfect character, a perfect representation, and said, if you see something like this, the correct answer is this. First time through the system, you get absolute, garbage out. You feed the error back and you adjust these weights, and you keep putting these training sets through it until it learns. Just to give you an example, let's say you're trying to see if you can spot something in the S&P 500 daily index. So you get your neural net, you get some sort of window of training values and also the target, and you move the window across the training set. Okay, there's a series of windows. And then if the system learns, then when you trained it, you give it a particular set of data, like the previous day's closing prices, and hopefully it'll come up with the right prediction. Before you rush off and try to do this, we tried to do this 30 years ago, basically doing this, and it was a total disaster. Anyway, it's moved on since then. We've got more data. AI in the capital markets. Now, as I said, we developed some of the early automated trading systems, and the big thing to take away here is not the algorithmic trading organization, although I'll go through it. It's actually how we've actually put more and more data into these systems. So when we started off, we were training these systems with trading data. The alpha model tries to predict the most profitable trade. The risk model measures the risks of a particular trade, and the transaction cost calculates all the possible costs of actually building the new portfolio. So from the alpha model, the risk model, and the transaction model, you design the portfolio that you would ideally like to own. You then get rid of the things that you no longer want to hold, and you quietly buy the assets that you'd really like. And this is this is done by the execution model. Now, the interesting thing is, what we did over the years, we start with trading data, and then we started using economic data to make it more effective, still the same basic model, then company data, then social media data, and I have to say that Twitter is a total dead loss, but anyway, other things like Telegram, etc., better. And then finally, as I mentioned today, alternative data, crop yields, credit card data, etc. And this has been mirrored in all the other sort of automated analytic systems that are around. The interesting thing is, because these things needed to actually execute high frequency trading and execute in a few milliseconds, you can only use actually really simple algorithms and not the more sophisticated ones that are used now for what you might call low frequency or intraday trading. The data-driven regulation. This is a bit of an overview of the types of systems that we're building with the regulators. Automated advice, helping people to actually register with a regulator, online monitoring, both for compliance and also for regulation, compliance reporting, how to improve this, how to help the regulators understand things. And in the future, the sort of work in progress at the moment, looking at how to have things like computer executable rule books. The important thing, takeaway from here is in a year or so's time, a lot of compliance and regulation in a company, not just in finance, but across in real estate, construction, etc., will all be automated. The most important takeaway lesson here is that do not try and automate everything with AI. Let the humans do what they're best at, which is the judgmental bit. That's the red box at the bottom. This isn't particularly important. This is some of the examples that we've built with the FCA and some other companies. Now we've moved on to algorithms. Now, algorithms are a particularly interesting area because in a few years' time, and it might be 5, not 50, we're going to have possibly even billions of algorithms interacting with each other and also interacting with humans without very much human intervention. And this has thrown up a whole new set of challenges. Obviously, lots of the financial companies are very worried about whether their trading algorithms and recruitment algorithms that are now used extensively, are actually legal. So we're working on looking at the legal status of algorithms, trying to get algorithms to explain themselves, particularly important in financial services and also in healthcare, and also looking down at things like ethics. So this is a great area. We're even doing work on looking at can we detect algorithms become unintentionally fraudulent. So here's an example of lots of opportunities for automation, etc. Now, I briefly mentioned federated learning. The big discussion at the moment is about data privacy, and there's quite a few companies, huge amounts of legislation to preserve privacy in data. At the same time, companies want to collaborate. You need to analyze data from Internet of Things devices. And what federated learning will allow us to do, and this is particularly of interest to governments and regulators, it will allow people to collaborate without actually showing their raw data. If it were, it's a technology to watch, it's just starting. It's like actually taking the algorithm to the data rather than pulling all the data into the cloud to process it. This was pioneered by Google for actually doing analytics across millions of Android phones to predict keystrokes. And there basically are two major application areas. One is the sort of doing machine learning across millions of very simple devices. And the other one is where you've got a few very large companies or companies with large data sets wanting to collaborate, but not wanting to actually give up their raw data. So as I said, this is a technology to watch, and I think it is the future of privacy preserving data access. Work in progress is on what we call computable regulations, contracts, and laws. This is important for automation, but it's also important if you take, for example, things like trading algorithms. If they're going to, they're going to need to find out whether they're compliant in a particular jurisdiction, and maybe on a sort of hour-by-hour basis. And this will allow automated systems to actually interrogate databases of laws, contracts, regulations, etc., to check for this. And we're developing a system, very simple system, where you can put up almost what we call a digital twin. So the professional, the lawyer or the regulator writes the regulations or contract or law in natural language, and the system uses AI to actually automatically generate a an equivalent computer executable model. So we're hoping to sort of crack this in the next year. Now I'd like to go back to what I was saying about the infrastructure and digital marketplaces. We've got this thing called this taNet project, which what it's trying to do, it's to provide a completely integrated infrastructure for institutions and individuals, so that everything becomes potentially referenceable, accessible, etc. And this is the sort of end goal for the digital marketplace. And the idea is to connect everything together. And to repeat the slide that I did before, what it's doing is it's taking all these different technologies, the data science technologies, and integrating them together into the platform that I previously mentioned. So if this platform or something equivalent of this gets into play, you could then do something like provide general and household insurance from anywhere in the world. So what effect is this? You could end up with an Amazon of insurance, in the same way that Vanguard is actually eating up more and more of the retail financial services or wealth management. And the question is, who's going to do it? You know, it could be a country like Estonia that we never, would never even clocked. It could be an offshore financial center, such as the Isle of Man, for example, which is very well organized. Or it could be a country like Singapore. So as I said, this is actually an incredible opportunity. And in many ways, the Asian economies, countries are actually surging ahead. And as we've seen in this last week with Debenhams and Arcadia in the UK, companies that have been around for a significant time making significant profits, large, multi-million pound profits are very vulnerable. And if I then said to the big insurance companies, our big legal companies, maybe even our big audit companies, you are vulnerable to, attack by other countries, particularly nimble companies like Singapore. They probably have laughed 2 years ago. Hopefully now there's less complacency. My worry is that in Europe, not just in the UK, that we are not taking this data tsunami or digital tsunami seriously. And if you look at Singapore, Korea, China, Vietnam, they are focusing everything on economic development. They've got a really well-trained, educated, often young workforce. They are very innovative. They're looking for opportunities every day. What do I see in Europe, not just in the UK? Half the population haven't got the digital skills to prosper or even earn their living. And the government, not just our government, but governments across Europe in particular, are not, they don't seem to understand what is going on, particularly in Asia, and the impact this could have on our big companies. So hopefully that was of interest. I think it's going to be a roller coaster ride for the next few years. There's an opportunity both for individuals, for nimble companies, for nimble governments to do very well indeed in a global marketplace. My worry is that in lots of these cases, individuals, companies and governments are hugely complacent. I say to my students, while Singapore, Korea and China are devoting all of their education system, all of their investment, all of the work of the government into supporting economic development, probably the biggest debate in the UK is on whether we should have unisex toilets. Get real, guys. This is very serious. We are in a game-changing situation. Thank you for listening. I hope that there was at least some thought-provoking ideas there. I think that the worry is that we could lose our service sectors in a few years to places like Singapore. People might be a little nervous about, sharing the data, not sharing the data, using services from China. But if Ping An are offering me car insurance for £50, I'm going to go with it, obviously. So there's an opportunity there. They might not want to use Alipay or something like that. But if you take Singapore, it's a highly respected, well-organized country, a very focused government, very in tune with digital technology. And you don't see the same leadership from any of the European governments. And the great thing that's worried me for a large number of years is the fact that half of the students in the country were actually encouraged to go to university and study subjects that don't give them any latent skills to earn their living. And we've seen what's happened with the hospitality industry, in the last few weeks. It's been devastated. And if we don't get our economic act together, then life's going to be a bit miserable here. So it's something with huge implications for the European economies. Interesting. You could say that algorithms are like, the proverbial buses. New ones come along all the time. And there's some very interesting algorithms around. There's GANs, generative adversarial networks, very good for doing things like image manipulation. There's LSTMs, very good for NLP. And then there's the sort of so-called fake news one, which is GPT-3 transformers. And there's also some interesting things like transfer learning and such like. What we tend to do, I think, one of the things is there's some questions whether GPT-3 has been overhyped, which, there's been some commentary on that. What it's interesting to do to look at it to see if you can use it for applications other than what it's currently being used, which is for English generation. But if, for example, you're trying to design avatars or chatbots that are human-like and giving you advice, something like GPT-3 probably will make a significant contribution. I think, can I just creep up on this? I've done a lot of advisory work for Asian governments. When I went to see the head of the Ministry of Science and Technology in Korea, and this is probably about 25 years ago, the guy had a PhD in electrical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. When I go and see somebody in the equivalent position in the UK, they probably wrote a thesis on Chaucer, at one of our premier universities. Latent, a very bright person, without doubt, but they don't have a same sort of feel for the science and engineering that you'd expect in an Asian country. And when I interact with a lot of people who are doing policy, often they're not science and engineering people, and therefore they write a policy paper without actually saying what they should do to change it round. So we need a sea change in leadership in government across Europe, not just the UK, and also there's a lot of complacent companies out there. And you can see this just from the retailers. And you know, the big thing about the coronavirus and these companies going you know, to the wall is that companies are now starting to realize that it isn't something that's just going to take you down 5%, you know, in your profits. It could actually wipe you out. So I think the difficulty is getting the people that can actually make the decisions to actually appreciate what's going on in things like China and such like. So we are definitely at a what is it? Not a pivot point. What is it? An inflection point. That's the right word. And it's not just us. It's across, you know, the whole of, you know, Europe and even to the United States to some extent.
Yeah, thank you again, Philip, for again a really great overview. And yeah, it's a fascinating subject, which is just going to become more relevant as time goes on.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay, it's a pleasure. We will be editing this talk and be putting it on our IORMA website very soon. So thank you very much. Thank you, Philip.